Hello, this is part 5 in this series about React, file-based routing, static site generation, and server-side rendering. Thanks to the great people that helped out. I mentioned earlier Absolute, Manesse, David of course brought us together, but actually in the open discussion, Bjorn, who goes by Edrinth, I may be butchering that, Bjorn had some great input and mentioned React Router DOM and file-based routing specifically. So not in the context of SSG, but file-based routing. So I'll talk to that. And I had a follow-up call with Bjorn to get further thoughts from him because he made some really good points. So thank you, Bjorn. Add you to the list of awesome people that helped. And of course, Aurelian, thanks a million for sharing your insights on Vike. So one other thing that's noteworthy when we're comparing options is that if you're going to use React server components and do server-side rendering, when your component executes on the server, the one issue you're going to run into, it's obvious, is you don't have web APIs on the server because you're not in the browser. So state the obvious, but if you have components that you've brought over from other applications that have web APIs in them, so in the example here, you call window.local storage. Window doesn't exist on the server. Now, this example is Vike, and that would break in Vike. In the case of Next with components have the ability to mark it as a use client. So they have a use client directive. Notwithstanding that, it still will execute on the server at least once. I don't know whether this is some contract that the React team for server components have said it's the way it has to be, or it's just something that the Next team decided, but I wish it wasn't true. It's kind of painful. If you as a developer mark it as use client, it's because you truly want it to run on the client. And you'd be perfectly okay with having a placeholder or even a gap in your application until it renders on the client. Not everything is a website requiring SEO, back to our further points in the prior videos. So workarounds are maybe wrap anything with web APIs in a use effect call, or conditionally do checks. Different frameworks give you different ways to check if you're on the server, but you fail in that you can also just check if the window object or whatever you're trying to call it, does window exist, does window.local storage exist, etc., etc. Because there's been some web APIs have been implemented on the server. So for example, fetch works on the server and things like that, and they try to use the same API. So it's not like all of them don't work, but a certain amount of them don't make sense. Some things that pertain to the window don't make sense on the server. So that's one thing to think about. If you just write it as a client-side app, you don't have to worry about that. Any React component will work. Aurelian also pointed out some things. We said, hey, since you're on the call, we're just comparing tools here. We don't have a horse in the race other than for our own learning. Put your sales hat on. Tell us what's great about Vike. And so some of the things Aurelian shared were that Vike is more flexible. It's going to be less code than Next. And findings are that you may not need the flexibility at the beginning, but as the project advances, you'll appreciate the options it gives you. We mentioned earlier, Aurelian is a member of the Developer Safe Place server and a Vike core team member. And Vike have their own Discord server. And he also mentioned that there's a new tool to scaffold the creation of new Vike apps. So that's the batis.github.io that's linked below. So take a look at that if you're interested in Vike. And here's a comparison with input from everybody. So going line by line, file-based routing, yes. So Next made it popular. They of course do it. And we talked about how. I don't need to rehash that. Watch the next video. Vike, ditto, yes. They do it a little bit differently. And if we want to do SSG, in both cases, they kind of build on file-based routing and allow you to determine what the possible routes need to be. I'll cover that in SSG. TanStack router also offers file-based routing. Absolute pointed that out, and Absolute has some experience with it. I spent some time reading the docs before shooting this video. So while I haven't done any production projects with it, I spent a bunch of time reading about it, and that's not a substitute for experience, but I wanted to try to be accurate with this. And when we say the last column, normal React Vite app, quote unquote normal, the default way people would route is with React Router DOM. So React Router DOM does handle file-based routing, and Bjorn pointed that out. And the only reason we hadn't mentioned that was because we were looking through the lens of SSG. It's valid and it's worth mentioning, and thanks for bringing that up, Bjorn. And you might not need SSR or SSG for many apps. We talked about that throughout this series. If you don't need it, then you're probably adding complexity. If your needs are not SSR and SSG, then maybe you do want to look at either just using React Router DOM like you did before. Now, what Bjorn pointed out he does in his projects is he wrote some code to crawl his pages and find every page. And from that, he's generating a sitemap and also doing some further work to pre-render some pages for routes so that they'll be found. So that's kind of a neat approach. And as opposed to just redirecting all traffic to the index.html if for all the other routes, which is another technique people often do. He also mentioned that. Okay, client-side routing. Can Next do it? Yes, it can. Client-side routing, and differentiate from rendering. We're talking routing. And if you use the Next link element, which they provide, then it'll do client-side routing instead of doing full page loads. So that's great. And hand in hand with layouts and stuff, that's really convenient and it gives you good performance. Vike, yes, you can with config change. They server render by default. So you just have to make a config change and then you can they server route. You can client-side route if you make a change. TanStack router, yes, it does client-side. SSR, yes, Next certainly does SSR and that's what they want. And they are being rendering, not routing. So Vike, yes, you can do either. They default to SSR, but you can change it to CSR if that's what you want. TanStack router, yes, they give you the ability to do SSR. React Router DOM in a Vite app, read the docs about React Router DOM. The comment from their docs say, if you want to server render your React Router app, we highly recommend you use Remix. Now, it's the same developers as Remix. So React Router DOM and Remix are the same developers. And Remix does require a node interpreter, server-side and prod. So if you want SSG, I believe Remix is out for that. They really want to have a node interpreter and prod, so that might not be the fit. If you're content to have a node interpreter as part of your UX in prod, then maybe Remix is worth considering. SSG. So Next, yes, and we showed you how it does it pretty well. Vike, ditto, yes, and we showed you how. TanStack does not seem to. After reading the docs, I also went on the Discord and I saw discussions about the potential to implement it, but it looks like at this time, no. Create React app, no. The docs talk about maybe rolling your own or some procedures, but if you want to use a meta framework, if you grab these other frameworks and use them, they'll do it for you. You don't need to figure all that out yourself. CSR, Next, you're swimming upstream. They want SSR and they'll render every React component on the server at least once as mentioned. So you're kind of swimming upstream if you truly want CSR. If you're okay with realizing it's SSR'd and then SSG'd, then you can still do, say, client-side data fetching in prod. And the example we gave was on the products page. You have all the product data be pre-rendered to static pages. And then at runtime in prod, client-side JS would make a remote fetch to an API to obtain things like pricing or stock levels. Vike, yes, you can change it to do full CSR. So that's a configuration change. TanStack router, yes, that would be the default. Normal React Vite app, yes, that would be the default. And the next criterion is separate backend. They don't want you to do all in one. Next, yes, you can do it. You can have a separate backend. You're wrestling with the direction they're going a little bit. They want to be your all-in-one. As mentioned, with a small config change, you can run a build that SSGs to static files, so then you can still do the client-side data fetching. Vike, yes, you can absolutely do a separate backend. TanStack router, certainly, that would be the default. Ditto with the cell's not filled in for a normal React Vite app, but yes, that would be the default. And DX speed, so how quick is it on your developer workstation? Next, hopefully TurboPack works for you. If TurboPack works, it cuts times in half and it makes it quite usable. Startup times is a bit of a nit, and so it's nice to have a fast startup time, and specifically, I mean, when you run your app in dev mode. But probably the more important metric is how long does it take if you change a page or a component before it runs, and it's quite a bit faster with TurboPack. Vike is based on Vite. It feels quite fast when you make changes. They feel very fast. TanStack router, the only reason there's a question mark there is I don't have personal hands-on experience. I hypothesize, and you can verify that it would be pretty darn fast because it'll run with Vite, and it's doing all client-side routing, even if it's file-based routing, whether it's file-based routing or they have code-based routing, which is kind of similar to the way React Router DOM always used to work. That I would assume is very fast. And a normal React Vite app, presumably using React Router DOM, that's going to be very fast. Next thing is it obtrusive? With Next, candidly, yes it is. Next is quite opinionated. They do a lot of things and they add a lot of features, and it's just that it's different than the way things work in a normal React app, and there's a learning curve associated with that. And if it was to be your main dev environment and you're willing to overcome that learning curve, meaning read the docs and details. They have a course right on the site, so I don't mean you have to pay for third-party courses or anything. If you're experienced, you can figure it out, but you'll sink the time in to do it. You really will. And you'll have to have actually built a bunch of stuff in it to get your arms around it. So if you're willing to overcome that, super. Think to your extended team, and if you develop for customers, think about your customers too, because time's a consideration. Vike, I'd have to say that it's not as obtrusive. It really, I think that their promises that they make on the website feel pretty valid, and the learning curve is very, very small. And maybe having used other frameworks like Next, that could have affected the learning curve in my personal experience. So I can only speak from personal experience, but I found Vike very quick to learn. I was very quickly able to get it to do what I wanted it to do. Between reading the docs and reading the samples, I was able to figure it out very fast compared to alternatives. TanStack router, I've not done it and put it in prod, but I did read the docs. I've read a bunch of docs and examples and whatnot, and I think it'd be pretty fast. I don't see an issue with it, and it has a lot of features, does a lot of useful things. So I think we scratched the surface talking about what it can do for you, and I don't want to misspeak, but it looks quite feature rich and capable. Great a React app with Vite. With React Router DOM. If that's what people are used to, if that's their baseline, then the delta is nothing, because that's what their baseline is. So there's zero delta there. But if that's what they're used to, I don't think, say, staying with a client-side rendered app, say a Vite app, switching from React Router DOM to TanStack looks pretty easy. TanStack looks like you can get your arms around it very quick. So I think you got some good options, and it may come down to what your needs are, maybe for one specific app, or if you've got a bunch of apps you need to develop and support. What's the stable of apps that you're responsible for, and your team and your customers' teams and things like that. So hopefully this has been helpful, and huge thanks to everybody that contributed to the series. And we'll probably also post individual things on Instagram. These are being posted to YouTube to start with. Please follow these accounts. Hopefully you'll find new stuff added there as well. They're brand new accounts, so there's not much to see there yet, and not much in the way of followers either, but appreciate your attention, and thanks to everybody who contributed. And David, thanks a million for getting us together on the Developer Safe Place Discord server. It's a great server, and just enjoy being there. They're great people, smart people that really enjoy talking about development and sharing their knowledge. Thanks, guys.